Studio A at the USC Annenberg School. He's Anthony Chiardelli. I'm Jas Kang. NHL season's getting started tonight. We're going to give you a quick preview of it. I think we're the only two guys in Southern California excited to see it. Anthony, what about you?
Yeah, it feels like it at this school.
Well, it's weird to see. You know what? I think if the Kings became good, which it had been. I mean, they won 3 Stanley Cups over the last 10 years now, or 6 years, 7 years. I think then people will get excited about it, but right now I don't feel any anticipation for the fact that the NHL season started.
Absolutely not. No, there's nobody here seems to care. None of the Kings are bad, and the Ducks have been decent over the last decade, but still, nobody cares about the Ducks here either. It's kind of sad.
Did they draw okay for the playoffs though overall?
I think so. Yeah, I think they did. I think they did all right. I think I don't want to say anything incorrect, but I'm pretty sure they sold out their building.
All right, how we're going to do this for you guys today, Anthony, being a New Hampshire boy and Boston fan through and through, he's an East Coast guy. He's going to be previewing the Eastern Conference. I'm a West Coast boy. As you can tell, I'm the cooler one. That's why I'm going to be taking care of the Western Conference. So we're going to start it off, Anthony, over in the Atlantic Division. Who do you see getting into the playoffs as the top 3 seeds, and how do you think that division is going to shake out?
So Atlantic Division is going to be interesting this year. I definitely don't think they're going to send four teams. I just think the Metro is too good. The Metro is stacked, and if you look at it, a lot of the teams in the Atlantic didn't do quite as much as they should have in the offseason to kind of compete. So I think it's going to be 3 teams from the Atlantic. So we're going to start off with my first team. Team number 1, kind of a surprise, the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Okay, this is paining me to see this right now because I cannot stand the Leafs being from Vancouver. But why do you think they're going to be able to take care of business in the division?
First of all, I don't think that the second-year players now, Matthews, Marner, Nylander, I don't think they're going to have a slump at all. I mean, they're too high-end. I think even though teams can adjust to kind of what they're good at, they're motivated. They've had the playoff experience. I mean, they took Washington a little further than anybody thought they would. So I really think Toronto is a threat this year, and I think that they're overall, with their coach, with Babcock, it's a little bit of a slip of tongue there. Mike Babcock is.
It could be Babcock too. We don't know. We don't know what's happening.
I'd say Babcock is probably the Bill Belichick of the NHL. I mean, he's going to get his team ready every year, and they're going to be able to compete. So I think Toronto comes in number 1. If they do have a weakness, it's defense. Obviously, I mean they do have a weakness. They need a little bit more depth up there, especially later in the season when the grind starts to happen. They can't get by completely on their offense. I mean, we saw last year Toronto had leads going late into the game, coughed up their leads, and lost a lot of games, more than they probably should have for the season. So, so my first team is the Toronto Maple Leafs in the Atlantic. We're just gonna move on to team number 2. Team number 2 is not a big surprise, Tampa Bay Lightning. The Tampa Bay Lightning are basically, I think they're ready for some redemption. They are really a stacked team. I mean, with Stamkos coming back this year, Hedman, Strawman, I think they have a lot to make up for last year compared to last year. So I think they're going to be team number 2. And really, I'm surprised last year they didn't do quite as well as they should have. I think it's time for redemption for them. Team number 3. As much as it pains me to say.
Oh, yeah, that's right. As a Bruins fan, yes, you don't want to see this.
The Montreal Canadiens, I do think Jonathan Drouin's going to have a huge impact on the Canadiens. They just weren't good offensively last year. I think he's going to help Plekanec. I think he's going to help the guys around him. I think Plekanec is getting older, and I can't stand his stupid mustache, but his goatee. But I think he's going to be. I think Drouin's going to have a big impact on the team. Obviously, Weber's still there.
Do you think that Drouin's going to be able to make up the difference? I know the last couple of years, the Canadiens have been a high seed every time they won the division last year. I think they kind of got screwed a little bit on the crossover having to play the Rangers, who are a very good team, in the first round. But do you think Drouin is going to be able to make up that big of a difference where they have a severe lack of offense? Do you think he'll be able to bring something to them, like a dynamic aspect that they've been sorely missing the last couple of years overall?
I do think so, yeah. I mean, a lot of the guys on Montreal seems like they've underachieved with Pacioretty, Gallagher, and what's the Russian guy's name? Galchenyuk. Yeah. I think they've been kind of underachievers. But I think if you add Drouin, who's really ready to step into the spotlight, it's gonna make a big difference for them. If one more thing, Price has to stay healthy. Price has been injured the last couple seasons, had injury problems, and he is their team. I mean, he is the determiner of whether or not they play well or they play badly. 2 seasons ago, when he was gone for most of the season, they were terrible. They started off 10 or 11 games undefeated, and then missed the playoffs. So that Price injury was a huge impactor 2 seasons ago, and I think it'll determine how far they go this season. And next, we're moving on. Since there's only 3 teams that are going to make it from the Atlantic this year, I think we're going to go with Pittsburgh Penguins, number 1 overall in the Met. I think it's pretty easy to say that they're...
it's a shocking pick, yeah. You really went out on a limb on that one, right?
Well, just to tease it a little bit, my shocking picks come at the end, the last 2. So stay on till the end of my my analysis. Chris Letang is back, obviously. He wasn't... he was injured during the Stanley Cup run last year, so he's going to be a big factor. Even though Bonino left, they still have... their core is unbelievable. Kessel, Malkin, Crosby, obviously, Letang, Murray in goal. They're as strong as always. Their role players are going to come and go, but I think that they're still going to be stacked. The one thing in question, are they going to have? These 2 long seasons, the 2 Stanley Cup runs. That's a grind. Nobody had won back-to-back since the Red Wings back in the late '90s, and I really think that if the team can overcome that exhaustion that usually comes along with Stanley Cup runs, they'll win the Met. Next up, New York Rangers. They're not a flashy team. I really think that they, like the Penguins, have always had a strong core. Vesey's going to be in his 2nd year. Kreider's had a career season last year. I think he's only going to go up from there. Nash is on a contract year. They still have Lundqvist. So the Rangers, I think, have the potential to get up there.
They just seem like they're a good regular season team. You know what I mean? And I'm wondering, what do you think it'll take for them to get over the hump, to get back to a Stanley Cup final? I know. We'll say this as a Canucks guy. I do have a soft spot for Alain Vigneault, so I wouldn't mind seeing him win a cup. But what do you think it'll take for the Rangers to get over that hump and get back to the final again?
I think they need a favorable matchup in the playoffs. Last year they had one. This year I think the same thing. If they can get up there in those top 2 spots and face another wild card team, I really think that they can do well. It'll save them, I think, a little bit of exhaustion in the later rounds. It's all about matchups in the current format of the NHL playoffs. So I think that'll help. I think Lundqvist needs to be refreshed as well. He had a good second half of the season, but his first half was pretty weak. That was when Raanta kind of challenged for the spot. So I really think it's going to be a matter of Lundqvist playing well and a good matchup in the playoffs. But I don't think Raanta's there anymore. Didn't he go to... Maybe he is there. I thought it was in the conversation for Vegas. I got to double check on that. But
well, I know Marc-Andre Fleury's in Vegas, right? I don't think they got Raanta as well.
Yeah.
So.
Where'd he go? Maybe he's still there. I might be totally wrong.
He's a backup. It's okay.
Yeah. He's good, though. I like him. All right. And so for my next team, Washington Capitals. They're going to take a couple steps back next year, or this coming year. They've their window's closing. I think it was their GM mentioned they only had a 2-year window for their really stacked team, but still got Ovechkin, Backstrom, Kuznetsov, and Burakovsky are all really good. Holtby, he might be my favorite goalie in the league. I think Holtby is so
better
good.
than Tuukka Rask. You like him better than Tuukka Rask?
Yeah, Tuukka Rask is good. He's not great. Braden Holtby is maybe that's a factor. I've seen Braden Holtby stonewall the Bruins game in and game out whenever they play. So I love Holtby. I think he's an X factor. The one weakness they probably have is the players they've already lost. They've already lost Williams, Johansson, and this is kind of a conspiracy theory of mine, if you bear with me. Barry Trotz is not. He's like Bruce Boudreau Part 2. You kind of follow if you follow along where those coaches Boudreau and Trotz have gone and how their teams do. It's kind of strange. Basically, so we have Boudreau in Washington a few years back. Great finishes. I don't think he ever made it past the second round.
Yeah.
Boudreau goes to Anaheim. They finish well. They only make it to the conference finals once. They blow it against Chicago.
Oh, they made it last year as well.
Yeah, but last year was Carlisle.
Oh, that's right. Carlisle was back there. Yeah, I forgot about
So this is more of my conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
So the Capitals hired Trotz. Trotz, 2 good seasons with them when he's hired, don't make it past the second round. And he had that same problem in Nashville. Nashville never made it past the second round. He was a pretty well-respected coach, but always a regular season team. So then you go to Trotz goes to the Capitals. The Capitals can't make it out of the second round. Then Boudreau goes to Minnesota. Minnesota can't get out of the second round. But then if you look back at where Trotz was, Nashville. Now they have Peter Laviolette. Where do they go? Straight to the Stanley Cup final. Where does Anaheim go after getting rid of Boudreau? To the Western Conference final. It's like, don't hire Trotz or Boudreau if you want your team to do well.
They
in the
do kind of
playoffs.
look alike a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
I will say that too. Maybe they're one and the same person. Who
Yeah,
knows,
maybe
right?
they are. Maybe they're just like they're twins and they just can't win the playoffs. But I don't think with Trotz as coach, the Capitals are ever going to really go that far. So yeah, it's kind of a sad state of affairs. Now we have the two wildcard teams. Both of them are going to come out of the Metro, I think. First one, Columbus Blue Jackets. They had a rough go of it last year. Obviously, they drew the Penguins in the first round, which was, I mean, really not fair considering how well their record was, and they got knocked out in the first round. I think they should have gone further. But they added Panarin. I still think he'll be good even without playing with Kane.
For sure.
He's really good. They also have Werenski and Jones, I think, are two of the best young defensemen in the league. So I really don't think Werenski is going to have a step back. Any defenseman who's that young, who can have that big of an impact in his first season, I don't worry about as much of a sophomore slump because he was just so good. And then the players they lost, Hartnell, they lost Saad, Quincy. Those guys are important guys, especially Saad and Hartnell. Hartnell more of a role player. Saad a skill guy, a lot of speed. So I do think they'll take a step back from where they were last season, but I still think they'll make the playoffs. And then finally, my team to watch next season, and I think they're going to surprise a lot of people.
Whoa! Did somebody pay you to put this on? What are you talking about with the Hurricanes? Going to be good.
The Hurricanes, same thing on defense. I love Noah Hannafin, Justin Falk's a good defenseman, and they've always been close. I mean, they made a charge at the end of last season, and now that they have Scott Darling in goal, I think they're gonna overcome that hump. And I think that playing in the division they're playing in, it's tough. I mean, they've been kind of battle tested now, so I think they're going to do pretty well. Their weakness, obviously, inexperience. Once it gets later into the season, they don't have a lot of guys who've really made it far. I think Darling's experience on the Blackhawks, even though he didn't start a lot of games, is going to be important. But I really think that, I think they're going to surprise a lot of people this year. So yeah, that's it for the Eastern Conference, and we'll save the Stanley Cup predictions for the very end.
Fair deal.
Yeah, stay tuned because I think I'm going to satisfy a lot of intense hockey fans with my prediction. But I'll let my co-host Jas take over, and we'll start hearing about the Western Conference.
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you guys. I don't have any funky graphics that Anthony made, but I'm just going to go straight up off the top of my head. But
sorry, it looked like I was on drugs when I made those, but I was not on drugs.
He probably was yesterday. It's okay,
I don't do drugs. I'm high on life.
I can attest to that. After spending the last couple of months with him, yeah, he is usually pretty high on life, except for during stressful times when we have a lot of projects to do.
Yeah, don't come look for me on Thursdays.
No, please don't. I've seen him in there. We don't want to waste our time with that. Western Conference, yeah. If we're looking at the Central Division, I think that is going to be the most stacked one coming up this year. I think the biggest thing that they have to work, that the NHL has to work on, I think, is fixing the playoff format. I liked it better when they kind of went with top 8 teams across the board. Reason being, I think the Central is absolutely stacked this year. I was trying to look at who I'd want to pick to get in. Number one, I'm going to go with the Chicago Blackhawks. Yeah, no surprise there. But the Blackhawks are stacked. I think they're the same thing as the Penguins. As long as you got Kane, Taves, Hossa, Keith, back there as well, they're going to be a contender no matter what. So I see them winning the division. Second, I have this team moving up, and I think this is going to be kind of the hard part for me was picking the second place team, but I went with Dallas. Now, the reason why I think Dallas is going to get there, I think they got a big upgrade in goal with Ben Bishop. That was a huge signing for them. They struggled last year with Niemi and Kari Lehtinen, but defensively, I still think there could be an issue. That's why Ken Hitchcock's been brought in. I think he'll be a little bit more, obviously, defensive-minded overall as a coach. But I think Dallas has enough weapons with Sagan up front to really make a difference there. And the third seed I got last year's losers in the Cup final, Nashville. They surprised a lot of teams. They kind of showed you don't. I mean, PK Subban is a legitimate superstar, but Pekka Rinne is also great. But I think they have enough depth and enough depth on the back end as well that they're going to be able to surprise teams yet again. I think they'll float around. People are going to look at them and say, they're not doing well. But I see them kind of making a charge late in the season and getting into the top 3. I'm going to save my wild card picks. I'm going to switch over to the Pacific Division.
Real quick question for the Predators. Do you think they're going to end up better? I don't know. I don't want to. If this is your Stanley Cup pick, I don't want to spoil it. But do you think they were better last year with Neil without Bonino, or better this year with Bonino without Neil?
Better with Neil. Neil gave him a little bit more of a goal-scoring threat. Like Bonino has been, he played for the Canucks for that season, really, when they made the Ryan Kessler trade. He was in a tough spot there. A lot of people were like, oh, wow, and you know who I'm talking about, Canucks fans. I've seen it all on Twitter. But the people, they would end up kind of complaining and saying, oh, look what Bonino's doing with Pittsburgh. Yeah, well, he's a third-line center in Pittsburgh. He's playing behind Sidney Crosby and Geno Malkin, meaning the top 2 pairing defensemen are having to play on the ice against those guys, opening up Bonino. Now, in Vancouver, he was a second-line center. Right, so I mean, it was easier for him to shut down. So I think he's a good player overall, but I think James Neal gave the Predators a little bit more offensively, which I think they're going to lack during the regular season, but they'll be a tough out come time for the playoffs. Now, the Pacific Division, it's going to pain me to say this just as much as it did for you to have Toronto and Boston up there, but Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Edmonton Oilers, they're going to win the Pacific Division this year. Yeah, they are the real deal, and it's going to be scary to see as a Vancouver guy to have these teams in your division, for the next 10 years, however long they end up lasting. But I think Edmonton is going to win that division. It's going to be tough, I think, when you look at the second seed. I was kind of going back and forth on them, but I think Anaheim will win out. They just have too much experience. Getzlaf, Perry, Ryan Kessler. What are your thoughts on Kessler as a Bruins fan?
I try to like Kessler. I tried really hard. I'm trying not to be biased, trying not to bring my actual hockey fan bias in here, but we're going to give him a little color. Sounds good. I hate Ryan Kessler. I hate him. I try to like him he's a USA guy, but he's always played for the team. No offense, Jazz. That Stanley Cup, even though we won, Ryan Kessler just rubbed me the wrong way.
Oh.
And then he comes.
You had to bring that up, though, right?
Yeah,
okay.
I have to hold that over.
Okay.
I have to hold that over you. But also, then he goes to the Ducks, where he just joins Getzlaf and Perry. He's a little agitator. Oh, he's not little.
No, he's not little. He's a massive dude.
He could be so much better. I don't like him.
Oh, a lot of people don't. I mean, he's obviously not one of the most popular guys. Him and who was it last year that were going at it on Nashville? Ryan Johansson. They were just going at it in the playoffs. I loved watching that matchup actually until Johansson obviously ultimately got hurt, but. I thought that was a great matchup, but that's what Kessler does. I mean, he was going at Joe Thornton as well, and back in 2011 in the Western Conference Final. I think the one weakness for the Ducks is going to be on the back end. Yeah, they have Cam Fowler. Yeah, they have Hampus Lindholm. Kevin Bieksa is real old now, but I mean, we still got Bieksa. We love him, right? But I think ultimately it's going to be a little bit tougher for the Ducks to kind of maybe go throughout the grind of a season, not having too much depth on the back end. I think that's always going to be a big thing. I think John Gibson showed last year in the playoffs that he is for real and he can lead a team pretty far in the playoffs on the back end. That's always been a question for Anaheim going into the playoffs is how's their goaltending going to hold up. They also added Ryan Miller off the Canucks. So I think they'll be a little bit more stable back there. I see Anaheim taking second in the Pacific. Ultimately is the third place team. This is where I had a little bit of a rough go at it, trying to look at it. I still think San Jose has the depth overall to take that third seed. They got a damn good 4 lines up front with Pavelski, Couture. You still got Thornton there. Marlowe's obviously in Toronto now, but I think they have deep enough. Brent Burns is awesome in the back. I think he's probably the best defenseman in the NHL at this point. So I think he's going to be a big difference maker once again this year. Now flipping over to the wild card teams, I think both teams are going to come out of the Central. The teams I'm going to go with are Minnesota as one, who is a constant choke artist, but I mean they'll get in at least. You know what I mean? Ultimately,
yeah.
So
it's a Bruce Boudreau effect. Bruce,
yeah, there you go.
Effect.
There you go.
They're not gonna. They're in the Capitals West, I think.
Yeah, well, that's probably a good comparison because they've been there for the last maybe couple of years. They've struggled a little bit come time for the playoffs. I think those Parise and Ryan Suter's contract will ultimately come back to haunt them eventually as they age too, because I think they're going to start having a slowdown. They're making like 11 million or something like that a year each. So I think, but I still think they have enough of the horses to get in, and I ultimately think the St. Louis Blues are going to get in as well. They're a solid team through and through. Made the conference final a couple of years ago. Lost some guys, but Tarasenko's still getting better. They've still got a good blue line with Pietrangelo and those guys. So I think St. Louis will get in. But I think a couple of teams I would say could be surprises coming up this year. They're both Canadian, and I would say one is the Winnipeg Jets. I'm going to be interesting to see how they kind of bounce back. They got a bunch of young guys that are there. Mark Scheifele is going to continue to get better. Patrick Laine going into his second year, he'll be awesome to see what he can produce. And the other team is Calgary. Calgary's been a hit or miss thing. They did sneak into the playoffs a couple years ago, smoked Vancouver in the first round, which still pains me to this day. How did you lose to that team? But I think they're a team that might surprise some people. Offensively, they got Goudreau, they got Sean Monahan, they got Sam Bennett's a year older, so I think they're going to be better. And it'll be interesting to see what Mike Smith does for them, because Brian Elliott's now gone. He's in Philadelphia, but Mike Smith should be able to stabilize their goaltending, depending on if he can stay healthy. I think that's been the knock on him for the last few years. And also for the Jets, they got Steve Mason now. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how they bounce back, because the last couple of years, Hellebuck and Andre Pavlik were stinking up the joint, as well as Hutchinson as well. So,
yeah. Do you think Yager's going to have a pretty big effect on the Flames now that he's there? I mean, he just signed a couple days ago.
I think it'll be fun to see him just in general, because I think he's just a funny old dude. You know what I mean? Like, I'm saying he's like 10 years older than me, but I mean, I don't think I think you can look for him to get 40 to 50 points depending on who he's playing with, which is a pretty damn good contribution for a guy his age. But I think he'll have a little bit of an effect in terms of stabilizing that locker room. Last year they had a pretty bad down year. I don't really like Glenn Gulletson as a coach. I mean, I know when he was at the Canucks, he was running the power play. It stank, which it has for the last few years. But I think overall, that team is going to have a lot of things go right, but it has the potential for them to get into the playoffs.
Now, we're both in Southern California, going to school here, we were talking about Southern California teams. We know the Ducks probably are going to be good. All likelihood they're going to make the playoffs. How do you think the Kings are going to do?
I was confused by that, man. I was thinking about that when I was looking at some of the rosters and looking at some of the previews and stuff, and it was hard for me to determine. It's so hard to write them off because they've come out of nowhere a couple of times. It's been like, damn, the Kings are really good, right? But any team with Kopitar, you got Drew Doughty, you got Jonathan Quick in net, Dustin Brown. I can go all day. Jeff Carter. I mean, they are a really deep team. I don't know what went wrong with them and why they kind of fell off a cliff a bit last year, but I do think they absolutely have the skill and really the toughness to, which is such an overly used word in hockey, but I think ultimately they could be a team that sneaks up as well. I think the Western Conference is absolutely stacked this year, a little bit more than the East, but I mean, and with Edmonton all of a sudden, just with McDavid, bang, you know what I mean? They're a contender. So I think that is going to be interesting to see, is how those teams, how the Western Conference shakes out. I think it's going to be a little bit more high-end skill than the Eastern Conference, but I mean, making my predictions on that, I really was unsure on who's going to do it, but I made them now, so I got to stick with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to stick with mine as well. Now, getting to the bread and butter. Do you want to go for your Stanley Cup pick?
Okay, sure. This is going to be terrible for me to say. I'm sorry to my fellow Vancouverites back home, but I'm going to take the Edmonton Oilers winning the Stanley Cup this year. I think Cam Talbot will do enough in net that he's going to be a stabilizing force for them on the back end. I think they're going to get a little bit better. I think Darnell Nurse is going to start developing more and more, and he's going to be a stud defenseman eventually, which has been a knock on Edmonton. I think they're going to beat the Pittsburgh Penguins. I think it's almost a dream matchup for NBC, for CBC, Sportsnet back home. Having Crosby versus McDavid, that's going to be the big showdown, and I think the Oilers will take it in a close 7-game series. What about you?
So I think a bit of an interesting prediction. Toronto Maple Leafs, Edmonton Oilers. I want to see it I'm admitting I'm a Bruins fan. As much as I would love to see the Bruins in the Stanley Cup every year, Toronto and Edmonton is going to be awesome. McDavid versus Matthews. That's the marquee matchup. Unfortunately, it's not going to do much for hockey in the United States because nobody will watch. But I will watch.
You've obviously lived here your whole life. You grew up playing the game. Why has it been such a struggle? Like Matthews and McDavid are two of the biggest stars you can have in the NHL. And even if it was an all-Canadian matchup, because I remember when it was Rangers-Kings, why do you think the league has struggled to get a foothold here?
I just think we had the discussion about this, and it kind of similar to, I don't want to compare, I know it's apples and oranges, but kind of similar to like why people don't follow women's sports as much in the United States. You weren't raised, in the United States, we aren't raised to watch hockey. I mean, since I was young, it was football, it was baseball. It's all about, really, I think, in my opinion, who your parents get you into when you're young. And hockey wasn't popular, really hasn't been popular in its entire existence in the United States, that popular. It's growing, but, I mean, people here grew up watching college football. They grew up watching basketball, college basketball. It's hard to suddenly change that habit. And I know I love the sport hockey. I want to see more people watch it, but I think it has to there has to be some momentous occasion where there's some player who makes it. I mean, like, for example, the 1980 U.S. Olympics team winning.
Yeah.
That made hockey more popular for the time being. Gretzky in Southern California. There's been kind of regional places and events in history that have made hockey popular. But there has to be, like, I want to say a player from New York, player from California, who has everything come together for him, becomes a hero in the United States in the sport of hockey, wins an Olympic gold medal for them if they ever, I mean, if the NHL ever goes back. There has to be some huge guy, or there has to be an event that brings hockey back into the consciousness. I mean, I know back in 2010, the Olympic final, that was kind of it was a big deal, obviously in Canada.
Yeah, that was a massive deal in Canada. It was actually cool because I lived in,
Yeah.
in Vancouver to see that. But yeah, I was going to ask that too. Like, how big of a what was the country into it at that time when the U.S. was playing Canada in that gold medal game? Like, or was it kind of the same thing? Like, okay, you have your hockey fans, your hardcore fans in Detroit, Chicago, Boston. You know, the traditional markets, Minnesota. Was it more of a big deal there, or do you think people even in California got into that a little bit?
Absolutely, people in California did. I was going to undergrad here. I was living in a house with two other guys. Neither of them played hockey. Neither of them really ever watched hockey. But when the Olympics came on, it was U.S. versus Canada. Both games, they were in. We were all watching it around the TV. People were excited. I think they showed it at the dining hall at our school. So it really did resonate, I think. But it didn't have that staying power. I mean, that's part of the problem that the NHL has. It's like the playoffs every year. People always say it's the best. Part of the problem it has in the United States. People say it's the best type of playoffs to watch. There's nothing like a Game 7 in hockey compared to any other playoff sport. But once it's over, it's over, and there aren't people talking about it like people talk about the Super Bowl this year with the Patriots and the Falcons. I mean, people are still talking about that. There has to be something that creates staying power within the sport. I would like to see more international coverage of like the World Juniors. I think, especially this year, not having the NHL go to the Olympics, I think you could make a big impact in the hockey market by broadcasting the World Junior, like having the World Junior tournament as the Olympic tournament, because that tournament has so many amazing matchups. I mean, the U.S. played Canada twice. They played Russia. I mean, it feels like that's all the teams. Canada, Russia, U.S., Sweden. It seems like that's the only teams that are really. I'm wording this the wrong way. It's always a matchup against those teams. And, I mean, in the other countries, in Canada and Sweden and Finland, those are huge draws. In the United States, people don't hear about them. But if you broadcast those tournaments during the Olympics, I think people are going to watch. I think people are going to be more excited because those junior players play, harder. I mean, there's more at stake. They play more physical. The game's just as fast. Maybe they're not as refined. But that brand of hockey is so exciting. I think that if they can, I know they're not going to do it this year, but in the future, if the NHL isn't going to go, the World Junior Tournament should be held during the Olympic tournament.
Yeah, that World Juniors is a massive deal back home. I mean, it starts, Boxing Day usually, and it just rolls right through, and people love watching it. I mean, especially when the time difference is a little bit more easier for us back in Canada. But I mean, I think the skill level and the effort and like even the way those guys, the young kids play, it's awesome hockey. And I agree with you in that sense. It's like I remember watching. I think it was Chicago, St. Louis a couple of years back when they were in the first round. Like that series was as intense as you can get as a casual sports fan. If you watch that, you would have been like, "Damn, this is amazing to watch." And I think it's funny that people haven't been able to really take a liking to it here. And it'll be interesting to see. I remember back, it was in the '94 final. The Canucks took on the Rangers. Sports Illustrated actually had on their cover, they said, "Why the NHL's hot and the NBA's not." They had a picture of Mike Richter on the ground, I think, with Pavel Bure, and then they had Akeem Olajuwon and Patrick Ewing kind of squaring off because that was the NBA Finals matchup. So I think even back then, people were starting to say, "Hey, this league is going to start taking off. It's going to start kind of bringing a little bit more attention to it." We just haven't seen that happen. And like you said with your prediction, I don't think it's going to get any better if they do. Because people look at it, and I can't stand this about U.S. hockey fans. Okay, and I've seen it happen before where they start cheering like USA, USA. It's like half your players are Canadian. Do you even know what you're cheering for here? Just because geographically where they are.
Yeah.
And I think that's going back to that point of Matthews and McDavid. Yeah, Matthews is American, but he plays on a Canadian team. But I'm wondering, do you think that would have had an effect if he was on an American team, let's say?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think if Matthews played on the Rangers or the Kings, or, I mean, the Blackhawks have a lot of guys, and they're a big hockey town, but I want to say Matthews on the Rangers or the Kings, absolutely. I mean, the whole city both cities would jump behind. I mean, both cities love a winner. Obviously, Los Angeles has a more fickle reputation for not following their teams if they're not winning. But if you have a guy who is like just that good, just on the next level, I think LA would absolutely embrace hockey again. Who knows who that next guy is going to be, whether he's going to be playing in New York or he's going to be playing in LA. But I think it's important that hockey is popular in those cities for it to grow the sport, and it stays popular for a long time. You have to compete in LA and New York with so many other teams, so many other sports, that there has to be, I mean, you have to find someone in this city who's the top dog, who's going to draw fans for 20 years, who their whole career is going to be, I mean, Gretzky was kind of middle to the end of his career when he came to LA, had some good years, but really, I mean, and he did expand the sport of hockey, but I think it needed to be longer. I mean, his run here needed to be longer, and the Kings needed to have better success overall when he was here. So I think really that's it. And it's a good point on U.S. hockey fans kind of seizing on the event and not understanding where their team comes from. I mean, a perfect example would be in 2011 when the Bruins won the Stanley Cup. I was at the celebration, and Boston has a lot of college students. I mean, they're one of the.
I don't want to hear this. I don't want to. Yeah. I don't want to hear about the 2011 final. Okay.
But all the
still stings. Still stings.
This might make me feel. All the college students seized on the like USA versus Canada. Boston's from the United States. Vancouver's from Canada, and they were cheering USA, USA. I'm like, you're a whole team almost. I mean, Tim Thomas was one of the few guys from the United States on that team. Your key players on that team, Marchand, Bergeron, Lucic. I mean, they're all Canadian guys. It's just a lack of understanding. I mean, granted, it's like a give and take. If it's good that those people were excited about hockey, and I think it's better overall for the sport. But you got to find a way to make them keep watching. That's the overall, I think, overarching theme for that.
Well, you know what? It'll be interesting to see. I think the NHL now has become a little bit more about superstars. I know we talked about this a little bit just in our own time, sitting around and talking hockey, basically. I think with the salary cap, it's becoming more imperative that you hit your draft picks, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, you look at this, I mean, the Canucks have been in the lottery the last couple of years, didn't really have the luck. Although last year, I don't really think that there was anybody who was a franchise-altering guy with Nico Hischier and Nolan Patrick. Mm-hmm. I think somebody else will end up winning the Calder Trophy this year, but not one of those two guys. But I mean, ultimately, Brock Besser is a guy to watch out for Vancouver. Yeah. I know he'll still be considered a rookie this year, even though he played. I think he had 6 goals in 11 games last year. Mm-hmm. He's a total.
There's a minor technical difficulty. Oh, yeah. That's
okay. We could edit that out.
I'll figure it out. Here we go. And bring this guy back up here.
There you go.
Oh, and we still got that guy. All right, back in action. I think that's. You better not let me touch this anymore.
Okay.
One thing, behind the scenes action here. We don't control. I mean, we do control the cameras, so we're kind of like doing this. This is and then like switching this. And so it's not the easiest thing, but we're getting it dialed.
We're working on it. That's what we're here for. That's why we're at USC, right? You can see the school behind us and stuff too. But what I was saying was. The NHL, I think you need to have a franchise-altering guy, and you've seen it now over the last, let's say 7, 8, 9 years. The teams who have superstars win cups, and I think even with the Bruins, a lot of people, they might not have had a guy who was like, he's going to score 100 points for you overall, but Bergeron, Marchand, Zdeno Chara, those guys are legitimate superstars. So, and you look at, obviously the Blackhawks are stacked, the Penguins are stacked. Who do you think is going to be the Art Ross Trophy winner this year?
Art Ross Trophy, I'm going to go Connor McDavid.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a shoo-in. Crosby's going to give him a run for his money, but Crosby, as consistent as he's been, I think it's going to, I mean, all those concussions, when you're a star player on a team, people go after you. I mean, maybe they're not cheap-shotting him as much, but they're hacking at him. He gets his bumps and bruises, and I think, he's been in the league, 12 seasons now? 11, 12 seasons? Yeah. That's going to start to take a toll. McDavid is fresh. I think he's really understanding how much he can dominate the league. He is so fast. I think McDavid wins the Art Ross Trophy.
He is so good to watch. I mean, I've seen him a lot last year, against the Canucks, and they play him, and I'm just like, oof, man. I mean, this is going to be rough to see him. And I think Edmonton might have made a little mistake by signing him and Draisaitl, basically taking up $20 million of cap space going forward. Because I think they do still need to bolster their back end, but we're both predicting them to win the cup this year. But I mean, that team, man, they're going to be so good for such a long time. So I think it'll be cool to see kind of a rivalry developing like that in the NHL, where if you do get a McDavid versus Matthews Stanley Cup, say 2 or 3 times in the next 7-8 years, I think more people will start getting into the sport. So it'll be interesting to see. It all gets going tonight. The NHL schedule officially does kick off this evening. Me and Anthony are going to try and check out a couple of Kings games. Maybe a Bruins game and a Canucks game. I'll put a Bruins jersey on just for the sake.
No,
of
you don't have to. You don't have to, because I won't put on a Canucks jersey. I'm not going to do that.
You know, we're not doing this show anymore after this. But you can check us out online, and we'll do this again next week.